Rank 10 Yu-Gi-Oh! A titan among Yu-Gi tubing, this little Montenegrin twink hit the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community like crack and, well, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community, apparently. Rada's meteoric rise to superstardom was predicated on a simple premise. What if the jokes in Yu-Gi-Oh! Could be funny? Hey. While Rada's Citizens Kane will always be the videos where they're just riffing with gimbals, one of their early breakout successes was the seriously named Legacy of the Worthless. In this series, Rada would famously talk out of their ass about how bad, basically a bunch of shit archetypes were. And while most of these videos were historic bangers, a good number were ignorant of history, leading to retractions for a couple of specific videos. And as a fellow YouTube content creator, I know full well the consequences of admitting you were wrong. Where's the fucking apology ukulele? Rate one archetype incorrectly like Worms or Ghost Trick. And from then on, your comments will be filled to the brim with rabid mongrels claiming you've made the same mistake with their dog shit archetype. Oh, Mr. Rata, did you forget that Arcana Force 14 was playable in Master of Destiny, Sartorius, and Duel Links 4 years after you uploaded the video? They're relentless, these Bubble Bassian, well, actually losers. So today I'm going to do their work for them. Rada recently released the very first Legacy of the Worthy, a relook at a comically bad archetype in Genex in the context of its legacy support that completely reconceptualizes how the deck is played. In it, he makes some general claims about Genex's previous playability that aren't wrong, but are ripe for people to type, did you forget Bumbus Control? How could you forget Bumbus Control in the comments? So in this video, I'll be detailing every single corner case bullshit context in which the Genex monsters were ever anything resembling competitively viable. And then you can link all those fucks to this video before they leave another comment about how they won a bajillion games with Blast Fan. But first, this video is sponsored by Elestrals. If you watched my Broke Boy Yu-Gi-Oh! Bonus episode about this card game, you know I am probably the second best Elestrals player on the planet, after Danny, of course. And as a result, I have been invited to an invitational tourney called the Elestriad. The Elestriad is an invitational limited format tournament between selected casters of the divine to determine the dominant pantheon for the coming year. Each week, casters can open 24 packs or one booster box of, no, that's not right, more sealed product to improve their deck, with the end goal of dominating the competition. The winner will receive themselves as a card in Elestrals. And I want that. I'm participating because, oh, you know me, I love limited! If you want to check out the tournaments, there's going to be a link in the description below. In my matches, I'll be representing the wind element, which thrives on an aggressive playstyle, but I think you'll be very happy with the decisions I make in the first couple of weeks with regard to opening sets. If I've timed this right, this should be going up the same day as my match with Coder, which is going to be a bloodbath. Make sure you check it out, drop a comment supporting me and letting people know about the MB sweep, and subscribe to the Elestrals YouTube so you can catch all my matches and watch me thrash the competition. We're going to be looking at the cards described in Legacy of the Worthy and in the Genex episode of Legacy of the Worthless. So first and foremost, let's just take a quick look at that.
Ladies, gentlemen, rail bikes and rail cars.
Remember when Rada used to open videos like this, ladies and mental gen, rail bikes and rail cars? What the fuck is a mental gen? It's just a funny way of saying gentleman? Is it a reference to that TF2 meme that is also a reference to a TF2 meme? For that matter, what's a rail bike? Keep in mind when answering that I'm an American and I can't conceptualize any transport mechanism that doesn't come with a completely unused truck bed and plastic nuts hanging off the back. Anyway, let's get into this. Genex Undyne. And also Genex Controller. This one's easy to do because Rada gets it mostly right. Pretty hard to deny that this card's insane. Historically, this card was mostly played in Mermail as a mechanism by which you could get a significant amount of powerful water monsters from your deck to your hand before committing to any of the effects like Abystius that would tribute them from there, triggering their effects. Now, notably, at the time, there was not a consensus that this was the absolute best way to be playing Mermail. In fact, there was a lot of bickering on online forums about whether the Genex version was actually the apex Mermail strategy. Of course, that bickering mostly ceased, as Rada correctly points out, with the release of Neptibus the Atlantean Prince. This competes for the normal summon and is a whole lot better. That said, some individuals still elected to play Neptibus alongside Genex Undyne and just damn their luck if they opened a grip of 5 normals. That said, it's not the only place that Genex Undyne was playable. It was also experimented with in Frog Monarch, of all things. It's like a really shitty, foolish burial for exactly Treeborn. And finally, you've seen the capabilities of Water Combo. It also has featured in a fair amount of FTK nonsense. Genex Ally Duradark. This guy was Biden blasting in 2011. Rada says in Legacy of the Worthy that there was never a Duradark control deck, and thank God for that. I'll DNA surgery your monsters to dark attribute. Ugh. However, this card did see a fair amount of play during Dragon Ruler format. Dragon Ruler pilots were wont for a mechanism by which they could beat exactly Evil Swarm Ophi on that format. And while they did have Blaster, sometimes you didn't draw Blaster. A significant amount of side deck space was teched for exactly Evil Swarm, as it was really the only other thing worth playing alongside Spellbook and the Mirror. Duradark's kind of a crossover hit. It's got a high attack stat and an advantageous typing to go up against like Kaiku, which was kind of prevalent as a sideboard answer to Dragon Ruler for Spellbook specifically, but most of what you were doing was targeting and destroying Ophion. Spell cards usually couldn't do the job because they'd search Infestation Pandemic, but Biden blasting was more than enough. Genex Ally Crusher. This card was the centerpiece of a theory craft of a deck that could have been good around Tengu Plant format. Now keep in mind, when I talk about Tengu Plant format, I'm not talking about like historic Tengu Plant format, because that format was dominated by a bunch of pros who were playing extremely loose decks, much better than opponents who didn't know better. In my opinion, it remains one of the most underexplored formats in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, alongside other fan favorites like Edison, and Genex Ally Crusher is a perfect example of how. This card's a great way to steamroll advantage in a deck where you always have some sort of board presence, and there's a significant amount of cards in Tengu Plant format that facilitate that. Mystic Tomato, for instance, is really, really good with this card. In fact, this deck just won a retro tournament doing exactly that. Now keep in mind, this deck isn't tier 1. It's probably not tier 2 either, or tier 3. Honestly, Rogue is kind of pushing it. But it is playable, and that's probably enough to keep you freaks out of the comment section for another couple of days. Oh, side note, RJ really likes this deck too. Let's go, 21-21. Next up is a series of cards that are on the list because of their proximity to the silly FTK enabler that is Genex Ally Birdman. First up is Genex Neutron. This card was playable a number of times, but most frequently in 2011 Karakuri Geargia. Yeah, see, it turns out that machine tuner is a pretty big category, and Karakuris really needed to see one specific machine tuner. But that wasn't the only place this card was considered. It had a short stint of playability in a deck that Yu-Gi-Oh! Top Decks is calling High Monster Beat that has a recorded top. It's functionally just Monster Mash, but instead of some sort of payoff, they're just summoning a bunch of monsters that can inherent themselves out in order to access the, at the time, extremely broken Rank 5 toolbox. As a searcher for Genex Ally Birdman, it also featured heavily in Gallus FTK strategies, which we'll get to when we talk about that card more specifically. Genex Blast Fan. This is probably the card that gets the most hate in the video relative to its actual playability status. This card was playable for a pretty significant amount of time, but it wasn't doing anything fair. Genex Blast Fan and Genex Ally Birdman have a really funny interaction when the card Divine Wind of Mist Valley is on the field. By bouncing Blast Fan with Birdman, you can special a Blast Fan from deck, at which point you can search another Birdman, and then special that, bouncing the Blast Fan, summoning another Blast Fan ad nauseum. There's layers to this combo too. You can get the Blast Fans back out by using the effect of Ancient Fairy Dragon, and then you can pop the Mist Valley for another Mist Valley and then proc it a whole bunch of times. Blast Fan doesn't have to have Divine Wind of Mist Valley on the field. You could theoretically get it off something like a Summoner Monk to make an easy Arcanite line. In practice, despite the fact that Divine Wind of Mist Valley spent some time on the ban list, I think for this specific interaction, the deck was never anything resembling good or competitive or consistent or worth whining about in the comments. And while people did tinker with Genex in better decks that were already natively playing cards like Summoner Monk, it was never enough to facilitate its own tiered strategy surrounding the interaction between Birdman and Divine Wind of Mist Valley. Genex Ally Birdman. This card's crazy. It should probably be the canary in the coal mine that a significant amount of the cards on the list are only on the list because they search or enable exactly this card. The canary in the coal mine, more like the Genex Ally Birdman in the... This FNAF animatronic saw play after release in, well, pretty much everything. It turns out a significant amount of decks are willing to trade a dummy monster on their side of the field for the ability to unlock the Synchro Toolbox, usually the 7-star Synchro Toolbox, which of course included Black Rose Dragon. This card was a fantastic way to ensure you were never all the way out of the game and always had access to a huge nuke. After release, as lists got tighter, this deck was shaved from most strategies. It isn't really worth playing a fun of to ensure that you get back into a game you're absolutely losing otherwise, but there were a significant number of decks in which it found a permanent home. Here are the hits. First up is Agents. In 2011, the structure deck strategy that aimed to play Master Hyperion was chomping at the bit for a card like this. Obviously, like in every deck, Genex Ally Birdman enabled synchro strategies for this setup, but it did so in a very particular way with regard to this deck. Firstly, Master Hyperion's effect is a soft once per turn, meaning that if it activates, then returns to the hand, then is summoned again, you can fire it a second time. Secondly, Agents uniquely puts a lot of monsters on the field, which you can return to the hand. Normal summoning something like, an Agent of Creation Venus, summoning 3 balls, then returning one to the hand for a Genex ally Birdman means you can access TG Hyper Librarian and get synchro comboing before you even commit to anything other than your normal. In that exact same scenario, the 3-star Venus plus the 3-star Birdman makes Bryanak, and guess what? You've just returned a ball to the hand, so you've got at least 1 activation. And if you want to get really greedy, bouncing the Agent of Creation Venus allows you to use the 3 balls, which add up to 6, plus the Genex ally Birdman for a Trishula. Next up is Hieratic. Hieratic loved this card. A significant amount of players were playing the full 3 copies, and it's not hard to see why. Usually, over the course of a turn, Hieratic Dragon King of Atum could summon a dragon monster from your deck. The dragon monster you'd usually be summoning is Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon, which can then summon one of the Hieratics you detached from your graveyard back to your field. Now, notably, Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon can be special summoned once per turn from your hand. So by bouncing this card with a Genex ally Birdman and then re-summoning it, you could then reborn another Hieratic monster and push for an OTK with a full attack Red Eye's DMD. Johnny explains this in one of his deck profiles from the era. It was functionally a mechanism by which any 3 Hieratics plus Blast Fan was an OTK through any board. But in early 2013, Hieratics wasn't the only deck playing this card. It was also very popular in Geargia Karakuri. Yeah, this one doesn't take a genius to figure out. Frequently, Geargia Karakuri would be left with guys on the field, and converting those guys into powerful synchro monsters is good. This deck was also already playing Neutron, so it's kind of an obvious fit. Though it did outlast Neutron as those decks became tighter. Birdman was getting tops in Geargia Karakuri all the way until 2014. Though notably, this card also has a top from the COVID era when one duelist brought it to an LCS to play in Virtual World. Why? I don't know. 6 plus 3 is 9, I guess. And finally, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk at least a little bit about the FTKs enabled by this card in particular. Gallus is a 3-star monster that theoretically can burn your opponent if it is able to mill a monster from the top of your deck to the graveyard. Gallus's effect is also not once per turn, meaning if you were able to find a way to trigger it infinitely, you would be able to win the game before your opponent can take any actions. Genex ally Birdman is a fantastic way to put Gallus back into your hand, giving you a second activation, but doesn't necessarily kill your opponent unless you reveal 2 20-star monsters in a row? Enter Koakai Myru Doom, one of the worst FTK enablers in the history of time. This card negates the effects of light and dark monsters that activate during the main phase, regardless of where they are activated. That means you can pay the cost for Birdman's non-once-per-turn effect, bouncing a Gallus that is on the field back to your hand, but you won't summon the Genex ally Birdman, meaning you are then free to activate Gallus, mill a card, use Birdman, bounce Gallus, summon Gallus, mill a card, Birdman, Gallus, Birdman, Gallus, Birdman, Gallus. Provided you're playing all monsters, this is an FTK. This strategy was really popular among Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTubers in like 2013, but it was never anything resembling competitive. The extra deck guys. Triarm and Triforce did see play. I wouldn't call them playable, but they were in extra decks. This is mostly just a remnant of like 2011, 12, and 13 extra decks being incredibly loose. Sometimes you would just have a slot for a fun of that would never come up, and these guys are fun. One of them's named Triforce, Zelda. These two in particular did see a little bit of experimentation. Triarm was tried in some Mermail deck lists, and Triforce was tried occasionally in Agents, but never consistently, never to great effect, and they were dropped pretty much immediately when better cards came out. Axel was theoretically playable in a Duel Links deck that was also playing our Genex Oracle, but that deck sucked, even by Duel Links standards. Like, Crusher Control got a shout out in this video, and Crusher Control is 40 times better than this strategy. And finally, Bellflame. This one probably comes as a little bit of a surprise. Bellflame is not a good card for anything, and it's impossible to think of a scenario in which he might actually be played. But what if almost every card was illegal? Bellflame saw a lot of play at YCS's that performed Battle Pack Draft. Yu-Gi-Oh's only competitive limited format, Battle Pack Draft replaced Top Cut at a significant number of YCS's, and one of the cards found in that Battle Pack Draft was Bellflame. Even by the standards of Battle Pack Draft, this card wasn't fantastic, but a 4-star monster with 1700 attack did find his way into decks frequently. You were never really happy about it, but you know, you'll take them. And that's that. A comprehensive list of every playable Genex card prior to the new wave of support. I hope that this means all of you will stop being annoying in the comments sections to the Legacy of the Worthless video. I hope. Okay, that's it. Bye.